Thank you, Ariana, Michelle, and Claire. The first question that I have is actually for Claire. In the pilot project, sites were prioritized based on utility infrastructure cost and engineering practicalities. At the same time, Gridworks is a thought leader in equitable and just decarbonization. If a community adopts a strong signal such as end of flow, like Catherine Bay did, what could they learn from the pilot project to help them support the local gas decommissioning goal, such as end of flow?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. I think what we'll see through the development of our deployment plans are some really important components. Around electrification costs, where I think local governments could be playing a role in terms of helping layer incentives on top of what the state and the utilities may already be offering. I think our deployment plans will also indicate workforce needs. I know City of Berkeley, for example, recently released an RFP looking for some help on this question around workforce needs for building electrification and gas system decommissioning. So what local governments can be doing to play a role there. I think I already mentioned the important role local governments will play in building relationships and maintaining and strengthening relationships with community-based organizations to help get that feedback from local communities that will be needed here, and to help with education and outreach. We're actually preparing for our project's first town hall, and we were debating yesterday about how we make our materials at the right reading level for community members. And this phrase gas system decommissioning isn't exactly accessible nor particularly interesting to people who aren't us. While it excites me, that's not always the case. So, getting that feedback from the communities, what do people care about? Or do they care about this at all? If not, how do we get them interested? Unlike a lot of work in the energy space, this is going to require entering people's homes. And I think that creates a whole host of new challenges. I think we should all be really looking at what we've gone through and learned as a collective around energy efficiency programs that have required similar things like weatherization, what has worked in those programs and what has not, around community outreach and education. And then I think the last is just the role local governments have with their legal jurisdiction around limiting expansion of the gas system and affecting what alternatives are available to utilities through various permitting rules. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Do we have any in-person questions?
Not yet, no.
All right, people are still chewing. Our next question from the virtual participants has to do with funding. Is the state offering any grants or financial assistance for those that are for some of these early degasifying pilot projects?
I think the state is offering a fair amount of funding as it relates to electrification, in terms of incentive programs and pilots and work around appliance replacement, et cetera, that I think is really relevant here. I think they could be doing a lot more to prioritize that funding for locations where there's a targeted electrification effort rather than just scattershot. But I'm not aware of anything that would be related to incentives for gas system decommissioning. And I think in particular, David Sawaya earlier this morning highlighted some of the challenges utilities are facing around the differences between expense and capital budgets to be able to switch that money. That's one thing for PG&E, which is a combined gas and electric utility. I think it gets even more complicated in the case of Southern California, where you have separate single fuel utilities. I don't see a lot happening in that space to change that situation.
Hopefully this one works. Yeah, that's essentially what I'm aware of as well. We don't know of any specific funding for this type of project, especially because it's so new. But there definitely is funding for electrification generally, and I think we're hoping that we can find a way to gather more funds, maybe from sources that we don't know about yet. As I said, that's sort of on our list for the next thing to do after we prioritize. So I'll be looking into it more, but we definitely know of electrification generally funding.
Veronica.
So my question is for Michelle. I'm thinking about some of your next steps and thinking about trying to get buy-in from all of the building owners. And have you started having any conversations, whether that be with the community as a whole or community-based organizations? And have you gotten a sense of what some of the main concerns are going to be? Because I feel like you have kind of like one shot when you start talking to them. And just how are you preparing for that?
Great question. It's definitely a bit nerve-wracking. I can say, we've been doing a lot of trying to lay the groundwork for electrification in general. So we've done a lot of outreach on electrification and why that's, a good thing for people to do. We have a heat pump rebate program that's been in place for almost a year now and has been very popular. An induction cooktop lending program, a whole variety of things like that, where we're trying to spread the word about this. We recently passed a new construction all electric reach code, for example. Did a lot of outreach about that. So that's where we sort of have been laying the groundwork kind of to the entire community. And then I think as we start to, talk to people at some of these specific sites, we're going to have to think very carefully about how we want to approach that outreach. And, like I said, we've been looking a lot at what Gridworks has been learning in that as well.
And as we queue up another question, I'm just going to make a quick announcement. So we're coming close to the end of the forum, and I just want to make sure everybody's aware that we do have an event in this space almost immediately after. So we will be encouraging you to leave relatively quickly. But we have the cafe next door, and we have plenty of extra food. So if you'd like to network, we'll have a space to do that. And we'll also, if you have to leave, we also will have a survey. We need feedback on events like this so we can improve. And we really would appreciate it if you fill it out. There's a prize. We'll tell you more about that when we get to that point. So with that, Ivana.
Great, thank you.
And everybody will get a link to all the presentations. And this is all recorded, so you can rewatch any section as well.
Thank you. Our next question is really for all the panelists. How do you recommend local governments act in the short term when targeted zonal electrification at scale is not immediately feasible from a regulatory standpoint due to the obligation to serve?
I'm going to let one of our local governments speak to that first. Yeah, I mean, I think the education and outreach component is really important. We were talking in our team meeting yesterday about surveys. And for me, something that's a real pet peeve is that we ask people's opinions and perspectives on gas and electric appliances without educating them about these appliances, what it means in terms of safety, comfort, cost, utility bills, et cetera. And a lot of people just aren't even aware about that these electric options are out there. I think I've seen a lot of questions in the chat around electric reliability. What can we be telling customers about the likelihood of reliability for their appliances if they make that switch, what backup options may be available to them, et cetera. So I really think starting with education and outreach. Michelle mentioned the loaning program you have for induction cook stoves, which I think has been really effective. A lot of local governments and utilities and CCAs have been engaging in those to help people just become more familiar. I think it's really important that we're all starting to think about gas system decommissioning today, because it's going to take a lot of work, as David noted, to get to 2045 isn't that far off. But I do think we're a little early in the journey to be doing gas system decommissioning at scale. right now. People need to be aware of these appliances. They need to get more experience, both as homeowners or renters, but also just in their neighborhoods of someone you can chat with, like, hey, what's that appliance like? What's your level of comfort? What have your rates and bills been? So I would really say starting there is super important to eventually wrestling with obligation to serve. I think also we probably need to evolve, I'd say not eliminate, but evolve the obligation to serve over time as a collective at the state level to make this possible, and starting to think about what that would look like, and engaging in advocacy around that will be important. I don't think we can do this if it never changes.
Yeah, and I can add a, oh, sorry, were you gonna? Okay, so yeah, I definitely agree with everything Claire just mentioned. I think also there are lessons that we can, lessons learned that we can take from other areas where cities have made a lot of progress in terms of water reductions and increasing solar adoption, whether it's lessons learned from your own city or other cities. We've looked at what's worked in Santa Monica when we were trying to really reduce water use within the city, and did some direct install programs for appliances and toilet direct installs. And so kind of taking those approaches and how the programs were structured and thinking about how we can replicate that for electrification. Like I briefly mentioned, we're hoping to do a heat pump direct install program. We also are looking at some lessons learned from our Solar Santa Monica program, where we provided and are going to soon again be providing solar technical assistance for those interested in adding solar. And you know, I think we're kind of at the early stages of where we were for that many years ago, and so looking at just acknowledging the knowledge gap and the need for a lot of handholding and connections with contractors and educating people on what to talk to their contractors about. There's the whole workforce development component to this as well. It's a good time to be a contractor who's knowledgeable about these things right now. And I think it's been tough for the supply to meet the demand right now, and will continue. But also I would just note to really for local governments to really track a lot of the funding opportunities that are coming down the line. There's, for example, the energy efficiency block grant funds, the Buildings Up Prize, potentially with your CCA, and to be able to use those for small pilots, for example, where you can help electrify existing buildings. So those are some kind of immediate or future actions that we can look at and track.
And Ari, I see you have a question. You get the last word here. What would you like to ask of our panel?
I want to thank all of the panelists today for such interesting presentations. I'm Ari Gold Parker from E3. My question for the panelists is on the size of pilot projects. We heard from Claire that Gridworks and the Northern California CEC project team are looking at pilots that are 2 to 10 blocks in size. Albany is looking at 1 block projects, and then the city of Santa Monica is looking at individual buildings, although including some quite large multifamily buildings. So curious for your thoughts on how should we think about what the right size is for pilot projects, and is that something that may change over time?
Start with that one. I think it's a good question about, you know, it gets to this issue of what's deliverable at this stage, and I think that depends on the circumstances that you're working with, and how many people in your city you think are going to be willing to take on a pilot project like this. In particular, one thing I've been interested in and kind of identifying sites is looking for places where there are multiple small sections of line, so that theoretically we could take, you know, 3/4 of a block instead of a full block, or half a block instead of a full block, or a block and a half, and make it a little bit more adjustable as we start to talk to the individual building owners in that area. So I think flexibility at the pilot stage could potentially be really helpful. And I've been looking really closely at some of those areas where there are more flexible sections of pipeline to be looking at. So that's one question. But yeah, I also just think it comes down to circumstance, and part of the reason we do pilot projects is, we kind of try out a few things and see which ones work best and what we learn from each. Like Claire was saying, looking for diversity within projects is really helpful too.
Well, this is kind of cheating because Ari and I are working together. But I think one thing we've really been thinking about for everyone else's edification is what's possible under the current paradigm and what might be possible under a future paradigm and what it would take to get to that future. So for example, things like it would just be easier if more people had higher penetration of electric appliances in their homes. It would make it much more cost effective. People would already be familiar with electric appliances. So again, increasing funding for targeted electrification would really help. I also think obviously the obligation to serve and evolving that is one piece that's really important, and potentially also changing our planning cycles for gas systems to extend further out into the future beyond the current 3-year planning cycle. I don't know, Michelle or Ariana, if your projects are focused on areas where you can achieve avoided gas investment, but that's a big focus of our project. So we need a little bit longer of a runway to be able to identify more projects at larger scale to do that.
Any super quick comment, Ariana?
Just to note that isn't one of the main components of our pilot, but still, definitely interesting to consider. But yeah, I think because of the limited granular detail from the gas company, it's hard to figure out exactly which site to select when you're corresponding it with age of the natural gas infrastructure, but something we've tried to look at as much as possible.
Well, I'd really like to thank Michelle and Ariana and all the panelists today and for all your time joining us. As we mentioned, all the slides are available, will be available via email. They're also permanently posted on BayREN's website, and you can click the events link to navigate to them. Today's will take a few days to get posted, but it'll all be there, as well as recordings. And please do check your email or quickly type in this very simple link, and we'd love your feedback. We need your feedback, and you actually do send a prize to a lucky winner for each forum that could help you decarbonize your camping. It's a PV phone charger. So really appreciate your time and attention this morning. And again, we'll have the cafe next door available to us to feel comfortable. Thank you.